Good morning. I just wanted to air my thoughts this morning. Not on anything particular, but what did come to mind was an idea that hit me yesterday on the fact that connectedness is not necessarily the exclusive property of any religion. And I've been getting into a few debates about, God versus the existence of nothing with a few hardcore believers. And I'm in a bit of a difficult position, to the religious people that I converse with, I'm regarded as an atheist. To the atheists I debate with, I'm considered a believer. So I guess I should explain that a little, because whilst I don't necessarily believe in a God of personality, or rather a personal God, I do tend to sense, I don't want to say believe, sense that there is a sort of abstract intelligence, for want of a better term, an underlying awareness or intelligence that seems to be underlying all things. Now, I guess an atheist would say, well, that sense is dependent on certain chemical reactions in the brain, that sort of thing. But I do sense this pure subjectivity, the awareness as being something apart from the fact that the brain, the body, the emotions are all observables. They're observed. I, the subjective awareness, perceives this, as I do space and time. Space and time are also perceived by something. And I usually use the analogy of my eyes. My eyes can see, but as hard as I try to look at my eyes, I can't do that. Now, I like that analogy because it sort of describes the knowingness of self. And that is that, yes, I know. And I know. Not anything, I'm just talking about the sense of knowing. But that knowingness can't ultimately know the knower, just as the eyes can't see themselves. Again, I guess the atheistic argument on that would be, well, what's the proof? And the great sage will say, well, this proof is self-existent. It's like waking up after a really, really refreshing sleep and saying, I had a really refreshing sleep, and having an atheist say, well, prove it. So what proof do you need that you had a really, really good sleep? Do you need a proof of that? Do you need a proof that you feel good? Perhaps that feeling of goodness is a delusion. Maybe. So how do we answer that? I guess ultimately the bottom line is, how you feel. Is it working for you? And that's where I think respect comes into the picture. There's so much disrespect from both the believers and non-believers I mean, I'm a great fan of Christopher Hitchens, the late Hitchens, but I must admit, his means of delivery, his attitude was often very, very heartless, very, very callous and cold. And I don't know whether that helps the cause of those who wish to, move the human race into a more intellectual, rational sort of position, I think that scares people away, and I've been guilty of that myself. I can be I used to be a little more aggressive in my viewpoints, maybe not so much now, because I don't think that helps. And likewise, suicide bombers espousing the cause of Islam are a little bit aggressive, wouldn't you think? So I don't think that sort of aggression on any side is going to help the cause of understanding. So that's just a thought today, just looking at the idea that this connectedness, this sense of, it's very hard not to use the word spirituality. I like connectedness, awareness, these sort of terms, which are less labelled than the usual terms such as God, supreme being. All of these things take what I consider to be the natural state of what is into a level that seems unattainable by the average person like you or I. So, just this simple awareness, what is it? That's the question. Once you start the movement inwards towards this source, it's not something that is measurable really, although there are some scientists now saying, through the process of meditation, there are certain endorphins that are secreted within you as you approach this peaceful state. So there is an effect to this, but I guess taking that a step further, the non-believers would ask, well, what's the proof that this isn't a massive self-delusion? For example, the concept of self-realization or enlightenment or satori, whatever you want to call it. But this isn't a delusion. For example, the great sage Ramana Maharshi had the so-called experience of death at the age of 16. It just came upon him out of nowhere. And he simulated the whole experience. And to his own satisfaction, said that at the end of this few-minute internal experience of death, he had this crystal clear self-realization that what it was that was going to end was not who he sensed he really was. In other words, the awareness observing this so-called death or simulation of death. Some may argue that it wasn't actually death because he survived it, but just that process of simulating it and holding the breath and being aware that awareness was something very distinct and apart from all the processes that were being observed, was that point at which, the point of no return, where one's awareness, as the old saying goes, like a salt doll wading in the ocean, step by step, dissolving, until the salt becomes what? One with the ocean. That's the analogy. And he said that as well. Apparently after this experience, he was never able to lay down fully the vibration of this experience, left him with a trembling. No, it wasn't Parkinson's disease. He was 16 years old at the time. Any photograph you'll see of this particular master, he was always in the upright position like this around maybe 75 degrees. He never was able to sleep laying down. And that was, according to him, a consequence of the great experience of no experience. The insight into no self. So the process of fully expressing that connectedness that I'm talking about, which was the kernel of this idea that I wanted to discuss with you today, was that begins with an inward movement of awareness. So in the tradition of the Vedantins, the system of philosophy in India, they say that there are two possible movements of awareness or consciousness. One is the outward movement, wherein we experience all the sensate faculties. This outward movement is called pravriti, the outward path. It's the expression of awareness in the form of the world, this dimension. Also the mind, dreams, thoughts, physical feelings, good and bad, pleasures and the pains of life. Pravriti. Whereas the experience that the sage of Arunachala, Ramana Maharshi, was talking about was more of an inward directed pathway, what is called nivritti. That is, tracing the source of this awareness to its, tracing this awareness to its source. Now, some people who've gone through this process, through the technique he gave, which was a query, who am I, have used this sort of as a mantra, but apparently that is not at all the way it should be used. It is not some sort of mental repetition. It's more a sense of this thing called awareness, this knowingness, this isness, the actual sense that you exist, and where that sense actually arises from, that the Master was talking about. And one has to be careful here, because as an astrologer I'm fully aware of the difference between the light of the moon and the light of the sun. If we're ignorant of the fact, as many ancient people may have been, that the light coming from the moon is not its own light, but the light of the sun being reflected, so too can we get caught up and through ignorance assume that the light of awareness comes from the mind or through some chemical process, as the atheists and gross scientific rationalists would have us believe, when in fact, just as the light of the moon is reflected from the sun, the light of the mind, according to the sage of Arunachala's exposition, is simply reflected light from one's higher self, from the timeless, spaceless itself. So that is really the process. Well, I put process in inverted commas. I prefer the term processlessness, because once we use the term process, then we fall into the trap of techniques, and process can only be a movement in space and time. In other words, creating a process that if I do this, or if I do what Medici just said by turning the awareness inward, then after some time I will have this or that experience. That's not at all the point. This is not a process. This is the very nature of your existence and your being, and it's happening right now. Hearing these words is simply the reflection of your own awareness, without which these words would not be heard by you, and this image would not be seen. So this process of meditation, or the nivritti path, It's not actually a process. It's processlessness or processless meditation. The simple posture of beingness, the presence of awareness, and just a simple choiceless acceptance of what is emerging in this moment. That's the real adventure. That's the real process, not a mantra. I mean, there are mantras that we can do. There are breathing techniques we can try out. Physical postures, as in yoga. And in fact, yoga is an interesting word because it relates and it actually describes the process of union. Yoga actually means to yoke. You comes from the word yuga. So again, that's an expression of this whole concept we're exploring today on connectedness. To connect with what? Who is going to connect with what? Even that itself is a concept that is not true. If we separate this thing called me, the thing that is observed with the psychosomatic organism, this organic process, from what is being aware of it, then of course we have this dichotomy or this split. So a sense that this me has to somehow become bigger, better, brighter, more enlightened. That's the problem. The me itself is simply an object, as is any other object. That's a very hard concept for people to grasp. Very much like the shadow trying to become the sun. The images that appear here in this dimension are simply shadows of this awareness. So, or dreams of the dreamer. It's very much like the dreamed image aspiring to become the dreamer who is asleep in bed. So the dreamed image is always only the dreamer, but not in the sense that the dreamed image would be aspiring to become that being in the bed itself. So likewise, this aspiration to enlightenment is along these lines. So in a nutshell, what happens as this awareness, even just for a little bit of time each day, is absorbed and becomes inward turned to its source, slowly the identification with the object that we consider ourselves to be gradually starts to fall away. And the residual is simply choiceless, simple awareness, presence. So there it is. That's food for thought today. I know for some of you probably a bit heavy, even me, a little bit of a departure from my usual astrological discourses. But then for the other few of you who are interested, hopefully it's been a pointer in the right direction. Have a nice day. Don't forget to join me at my website if you want to get into that side of what I do, astrology.com.au. Look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye-bye.